All right, friends, welcome to Women and the Vote, 1920, 1965, and 2020. So we have an extraordinary group of folks joining us tonight. Just want to take a minute to welcome all of our folks who are attending, to let you know that we hope that you will participate with us tonight in a couple of different ways. We hope that you will share with us, as many of you are already doing in the chat, where you're from. It'll tell us your name, but tell us where you're from and why you're here. We'd love to know a little bit more about you. And then as our panelists get going, feel free to ask questions using the Q&A feature. Usually you'll find that symbol at the bottom of your screen. There's two thought bubbles. It says Q&A. If you click on that, you can go ahead and type your question in. And so after about 40 minutes of conversation or so, we will shift over to ask some of your questions of the folks who are joining us today. So with that, I will go ahead and offer an official welcome on behalf of Dean Hollerith and the Cathedral staff. We're so glad that you all have joined us tonight. We're particularly grateful to our panelists who are spending their evening with us and with you. And my name is Michelle Dibley. I forgot to tell you all that part. I'm the program director here at Washington National Cathedral. As part of the Cathedral's work, in addition to liturgy and worship and music, we offer convening programs where our goal is to highlight critical issues of the day, bring a faith perspective or an ethical perspective to things that are important to our country right now. And in this moment, as we head into the 2020 elections, it seemed critically important to both reflect on the history of the vote, and it seemed particularly appropriate to do that in recognition of the 100th anniversary of women's suffrage. We also know that we also know in our work this year that it is important to highlight concerns of racial justice and racial inequity. And so we can't talk about the 100th anniversary of women's suffrage without also talking about the 55th anniversary of the Voting Rights Act and placing that in context, because we wanted to make sure that we were clear that the women's suffrage didn't mean that all women automatically had access to the vote. So we're going to talk a little bit more about that tonight. So I, at this point, am inviting Michelle Miller, our moderator, and our other panelists to come on screen with me. I'll say a little bit about each of them, not a lot, because we want you to hear from them, not about them. So Michelle Miller, our moderator, is the host of CBS Saturday Morning. She has a long, long list of awards that she has won as a premier journalist, and we're so excited to have her with us to lead most of this evening's conversation. And I'm just going to go in order on my screen. Professor Ellen Carol DuBois is a historian and a writer and author. She's recently published the first volume on women's suffrage in over 50 years. And we will put that link in the chat. So it's a long road to suffrage, and she's pointing at it on her screen right behind her. She was a professor at the University of Los Angeles, California for 30 years and is now writing and speaking full time. Dr. Thelma Daley is also with us. Dr. Daley comes to us with a long string of awards herself. She is the 16th national president of Delta Sigma Theta Sorority, and will share some of her perspective with us. She is a counselor and has held any number of national positions, all of which we hear about encouraging people to find the meaning of their own lives and to step in. That's what counseling and advocacy are all about. So we're excited to have her with us. Miss Judith Browne Dianis is the not co-founder, but longtime director of Advancement Project, a voting rights expert. I love this phrase, a movement lawyer who works on the role of the law, but also has her feet on the ground, particularly with voting rights. Spent time in Florida in 2000 representing the NAACP, and it has worked as well on the school to prison pipeline. So we'll be bringing some voting expertise to us tonight. And finally, the Reverend Gwendolyn Boyd, also a past president of Delta Sigma Theta. She is a scientist, spent 30 years at Johns Hopkins as an engineer, spent another 4 years in Alabama as the president of the, I'm going to get the name of the school wrong. And Alabama State University. Yes, perfect. Thank you. And is also ordained as an itinerant elder in the AME Church, and is at a congregation in Fort Washington. And you'll tell us the name of it. I'm not reading my notes because I want to talk to y'all and get this going. And I think I'm going to stop there, invite those of you who are inclined to prayer to bow your heads with me, and then I'll hand it over to Michelle Miller. So the Lord be with you. Gracious God, we are so grateful for the women who have worked and prayed and fought and played and raised families and worked in the world to make this place, this world better for all of us. We are aware of the legacy that we follow. We are aware of their strength and their persistence, and we are so grateful for it. I'm also grateful for the women who are on this panel tonight and the words and the wisdom that they will bring to us as we look back into our history with the hopes of creating even yet a better world as we move forward. So bless our conversation tonight, be with us, inspire our discussion, inspire fantastic questions from those who are watching so that we may be inspired and challenged to do our own work in the world as we move forward after this conversation. In your name we pray, amen. All right. Ms. Miller, all yours. I'm going to turn my video off and give you the reins.
Well, thank you so much, Michelle. I want to give a special shout out to you and, of course, the Reverend Canon Leonard Hamlin, who were, both of you, just he in particular, so instrumental in my visit just this past Labor Day to the actual cathedral. I was inside that beautiful building alongside my husband, who was asked to deliver a special sermon on Labor Day or over the Labor Day weekend. And so I just feel, you know, I get to see and feel some of that virtualness that was there on that day, because again, we are in COVID-19 territory and we're all sort of like trying to connect in ways that, you know, we still have to connect, right? We have to connect. I think it's so fitting that, that this is coming on today, because just yesterday, or was it this morning? No, it was yesterday. My entire family, 3 out of the 4 members in this household, we voted yesterday by absentee ballot. And I, I was thinking, none of us prior to 65 or 64 would have been guaranteed that right. And I thought about that, and I thought about what that meant to so many people. My grandparents, certainly my father, threatened me from the moment I turned 18 that if I did not vote in every single election, that he would have my hide. So it was particularly important to my father that I was a member of the voting public. And so many in my profession have this sense that, you know, we shouldn't be doing this, but you know what? It's my right, and I'm going to do it. So I say that I'm so glad to be joined by so many of you, and I wanted to start this off. I think it's also fitting that I'm the lone member of Alpha Kappa Alpha Sorority Incorporated, which was the first of the great sororities of the Divine Nine. But I have a funny story to tell, ladies, you fabulous members of Delta Sigma Theta. My grandmother went to Howard University, which is where these great organizations were founded. And she, around 1913, was talking to a couple of her friends who were AKAs. And they said, hey, you know, we want to get a little bit more politically active. And we're going to start this other organization. Why don't you come over and join us over there. And she said, well, you guys are going to be seniors and graduate, and I'm going to be stuck with these sophomores. No, I'm going to stick with my friends over here at Alpha Kappa Alpha. So otherwise, my grandmother would have been a founding member of Delta Sigma Theta. She could have gone both ways. So all that to say, I'm going to start with you, Dr. Thelma T. Daley. And I'm just going to ask you, what is Delta Sigma Theta for those folks who don't know? And the 7 Deltas who joined the suffragist march back in 1913.
Mm-hmm. Well, Delta Sigma Theta is a public service, educational, cultural organization founded on Howard University's campus. It is possibly the largest and one of the most, I have to be careful because of what you said, most prominent organizations of today. All right, is that enough for you, or do you?
That's wonderful. I'm very proud.
I have to tell you, I have to be careful. I looked at all of the notes coming in. There must be 1,000 Deltas or more all across the country who are watching this from many, many different states. I've just noticed there. Okay, so you want me to tell you about 7 of our Deltas who were suffragettes? Is that what you asked me?
Yes.
Well, I think maybe the number was a little bit greater than that, but let me
prominent
just say,
ones.
Yeah, let me just say, as I start this whole program, I have to tell you what I did this morning, okay? Because at 7:30 this morning, I was out on the street registering people and encouraging people to vote, okay? With about 20 or 25 other people out there this morning. And I thought about that because this is the last day for people to register. And I thought about the fact, imagine that I can vote today because of what happened on May 21st, 1919, or June 4th, 1919, or August 18th, 1920. Because I want to put that in perspective, but I know our professor's going to delve into that. Is that not right, Professor Ellen up there?
Yes, she is. She's here. She will.
She wanted to say yes. She wanted to say yes. But to answer your question about the 7, let me put the 7 persons in perspective. So I have to go back to 1896. We have to go way back in history. We weren't born at that time. At the call of a person by the name of Josephine Pierre Ruffin, there was a merger of some organizations, Black women's organizations. There were a merger of the National Federation of Afro-American Women, the Women's Era Club, and the Colored Women's League, and they became the National Association of Colored Women, July 1896. Now, there were key figures involved in the founding and the beginnings, women of great stature. Mary Church Terrell, who was the first president. Margaret Murray Washington, the 5th president, the wife of Booker T. Washington. Hallie Quinn Brown, the 6th president. Mary McLeod Bethune, the 8th president. And other names appeared on the membership roster. Daisy Lampkins, Nanny Burroughs, Alice Dunbar Nelson, wife of Paul Lawrence Dunbar Nelson. All of these women were outstanding in their fields. Now, Alice Dunbar Nelson, one of the persons you just asked me about, who was a suffragette, a poet and activist, a field organizer for the Middle Atlantic States Women's Suffrage Movement. And there was Nanny Burroughs, founder of the National Training School for Women and Girls in Washington, D.C., a suffragette, outspoken orator, a civil rights activist, an unyielding advocate for women and for the rights of others. And she believed that you shouldn't take a passive role to men. That was Nanny Burroughs. There was Daisy Lampkins, a suffragette, a political activist, a field secretary for the NAACP. There was Margaret Mary Washington, a suffragette, who was a principal at Tuskegee Institute. There was Mary McLeod Bethune, educator, civil rights activist, a suffragette, who founded Bethune-Cookman University with 5 little girls, boxes and benches, and $1.50, and she founded the National Council of Negro Women. There was Harley Quinn Brown, an educator who was considered one of the most important Black leaders to emerge during that time, a suffragette. There was Mary Church Terrell, that many of you know her name, a writer, a lecturer, a suffragette, who really worked vigorously in the suffrage movement. And I'm not going to tell you everything about her at the moment, but you know also with the monument being built in Occoquan, Virginia, she has a very prominent spot on the Turning Point Museum. These suffragettes all became honorary members of Delta Sigma Theta, which was founded on Howard University's campus. And just 2 months after Delta was founded, our 22 founders joined that great march, March the 3rd, 1913. And so I could say then, we had not just 7, but 29 Deltas who were suffragettes. I'll stop there because we'll come back a little bit later for the discussion. Did I put that in perspective for you?
You did, and you did, Dr. Daley. I just want to say, you know, I remember walking, there's now this brilliant exhibit at the Library of Congress on the suffragists and actually women in this great nation and their contributions, but specifically, you know, there is a moment of our history, Delta and mentioning Alpha Kappa Alpha.
Yes, shall not be denied. That's the exhibit.
Exactly.
Shall not be denied, the exhibit at the Library of Congress.
Yes.
Yes.
And what was so interesting to me was how here are these women fighting for their right to vote. And the women as part of that march, the leaders of the original organizers of that women's march told them, you need to march in the back of the line. And I know that there was some, you know, I know Ida B. Wells was talking about, you know, I'm not gonna further segregate myself. But there was some talk there, but I think I'm gonna go to Professor DuBois. See, I knew I was going to do this. Professor, what is the context of that moment in time as this construct of race was being played out, you know, and why is it important for women today of all stripes to understand and know the history of the suffragist movement in that context? You're muted. Unmute yourself, please.
You know, I've decided that mute and unmute is going into the dictionary because I'm going to say to my husband now, mute. Okay, I'm going to answer your second question first and then your first question. Your second question is why it's important for us to know about the history of this movement. May I say, I'm very thrilled that you said it right. You called it the suffragist movement, not the suffragette movement. We can talk about that later. It's just, you know, all great historical developments have shaped history. Let us say slavery, but let us also say the women's suffrage movement. Meaning changes depending on the moment in time we're at. Their meaning never stays the same. So when I started to write this book, it was 2015, and I thought, wonderful, we're going to have a woman president. And no. So I thought that we would be celebrating the achievements of women's suffrage by electing a woman president. That was not to be the case. Now, in the year 2020, we understand the legacy of the women's suffrage movement in a more, in a darker way, shall we say. We understand how crucial the right to vote is. We understand how we mustn't take the right to vote for granted. We can take pride in the role of women in 1918, especially the women of 2018, especially the women of color, and hopefully in 2020 for, I'm going to get a little political here, saving our democracy. And we know that there are many barriers to cross before we have a woman president. Perhaps we will have a woman vice president. So that is, I would say, why the various reasons changing over time, why it's important to know about this history. I have to say I'm very moved by this history of being preceded by the history of the great Black women's sororities because of the way that they capture this long, broad history of powerful sorority and what it means. I'm both impressed and thrilled and a little jealous about all you sorority sisters. Okay, 1913. All right, already the suffrage movement was almost 50 years old. Am I counting wrong? 43 years.
48.
And it had, in the years between Reconstruction and about 1912, the suffrage movement at a national level had disappeared. No coincidence, those were the high years of Jim Crow. And so any effort to further expand the right to vote was opposed. And it was particularly opposed by the former Confederate states and their white supremacist governments. And it was particularly opposed by the Democratic Party, which was controlled by such people at that time. So we come to 1913, and really only the second Democratic president since 1856, has been elected, Woodrow Wilson. He comes to Washington. He was a Southerner. He was from Virginia. He comes to Washington with control of both houses and a settled opposition to any expansion of the vote, not to mention a Southern gentleman's attitude towards women. At that point, the suffrage movement begins to move back to a national perspective and starts to fight again for the first time in 40 years for a national constitutional amendment. The suffrage movement was, despite the growing involvement of Black women from the National Association of Colored Women and elsewhere, the mainstream suffrage movement had become very white dominated. It was not hospitable to Black women. The women who were in charge were had been schooled, their perspective had been developed in the Jim Crow years. And so those women, in the context of a democratic government, are trying to run a suffrage parade, the first major national suffrage parade in a southern city. And it is that context that leads the leader of that march, a woman named Alice Paul, a white woman of Quaker background from Pennsylvania, to object to having the presence of women of color. As you indicate, Michelle, that meant that the Delta women were pressed to the back of the march, but it also meant that the great activist Ida B. Wells from Chicago insisted and basically broke into the line of march so that she would not be segregated, but would march with her suffrage sisters from Chicago. So that's the answer to the second question. I look forward to the other participants.
So let me just say something, because there is some discrepancy. If all I know that Ida B. Wells then moved up with Illinois and marched with her state. That's what I've read. Is that what you found out also? And just in some of my readings recently, I found that the Deltas marched with Mary Church Terrell, and she had been working vigorously in the movement. So they may not have been all the way in the back. I don't know what the back, how many people, when you say back, sometimes people think it's the caboose, you're really there. But I know they discriminated, but you also have to look at the courage of the Black women. I just want to put that forth. Even so, they broke through the barriers to fight for the right to vote. They had courage. Okay.
Daley, I absolutely agree with everything you've said.
Yeah, there's no doubt about that. The fact that they would even stand up and march in the march at all required, I mean, they were targeted. So many of those women were targeted, and you can imagine. But when you think about, I mean, all of these women weren't the same kind of women as you were describing, Professor DuBois. You had young women, you had older, more established women, you had, you know, some gay women, you had you had Black women, you had Black women who were going to follow the rules, and those who were going to disrupt. And so you had such an amalgamation of women. I was hoping, Reverend Boyd, you could describe the women of faith who participated, not just then, but, you know, how women of faith, we hear so often about the men of faith and how they really were instrumental in the foundation of the civil rights movement. I want to hear about the women of faith and how they contributed to enhancing voting rights for women. You're muted. Mute, unmute.
Got it. All right. Thank you, Michelle. I appreciate the question because we know even in this generation, as in generations past, women do all the work. And they don't necessarily get all of the publicity for getting the work done. But the women of faith were those who were on the ground making things happen. And so when we were talking about the women of faith, I got a couple of quotes from a book by Janetta Cole and Beverly Guy Sheftall, talking about Nanny Helen Burroughs. And they said that for Burroughs, the church was a site of resistance and an important outlet for the political empowerment of Black women, though she constantly battled the male leadership about their insensitivity to women's needs. So again, you know, Sojourner Truth, who was an itinerant preacher and an abolitionist, and we all know the famous conversation that she had when the man said to her that, you know, women shouldn't have rights, and she said, you know, where did your Christ come from? And a woman. Man had nothing to do with it. So she set him straight at that point. James Cone also in his book called The Cross and the Lynching Tree talks about, and I'm going to quote from his book, he says, the faith of Black women gave them courage to fight, patience when they could not, and the hope that whatever they did, God would keep them from sinking down. God was the only reality that whites could not control, and whose presence was found in unexpected places, doing surprising things. God would not come when you want him, but he was always on time, making a way out of no way. And these were faith declarations from the church. But I share that because there are so many stories of things that happened, especially in the civil rights movement, where Black women were behind the scenes making things happen. We know the story of Rosa Parks. You know, that there was another young lady who was supposed to, but she was considered too young. She was pregnant and she wouldn't give the right image. And so,
Claudette Colvin.
Right, Claudette Colvin. So with Rosa Parks, who was a seamstress in Montgomery, Alabama, my hometown.
Fit the bill.
Right, and a member of St. Paul AME Church in Montgomery, a woman of faith. And that's how we connected. That's how we got information, through the church. And she was already involved with a group that was making a difference. So she was a part of those Black women who were calling for change. Another Black woman, Joanne Robinson, who was a member of Dexter Avenue Baptist Church in Montgomery, she was the brains behind the communication strategy for the Montgomery bus boycott. Once Mrs. Parks was arrested, the people had to get the word about what to do. And this is the day before cell phones, before Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, any other kinds of. In fact, in the Black community, there were only a few landlines. So people, and most of them were party lines, but that's another conversation for another day. But people had to get the message. And it was Joanne Robinson, who was a professor at Alabama State, who went back to the campus, and this is a word people may not know, used a mimeograph machine to run off copies to spread the word throughout the city. Don't ride the bus. And she got the students from Alabama State, they rode their bicycles. People were all over the place spreading the flyers. And they got the message, and they didn't ride the bus, not for 1 day or 2 days or even a week. They did not ride the buses for a year. Now that's commitment to a cause. And these were women of faith who were behind the scenes making it happen. All the men were speaking, but the women were getting the work done.
And I want to give another shout out to the Library of Congress and the librarian, who is an African-American woman who has been instrumental in making sure that that the story of women is told. There is the Rosa Parks exhibit that is there. Yes. And I tell you, the thing, when I went there, I was astounded by the level of organization and commitment and difficulty. Yeah. Because when you think about like getting the word out,
yes,
it was and she had a ledger which she wrote down. So think about this: folks still needed to work. They had like old school Uber back then. You like call them, organize, and who would carpool.
That's
who
right.
Picked up and dropped off, who had cars, who did. I mean, when I think about what Black folk did back in that time, yes. It's to really rudimentary organizations beyond it. It's just
it's incredible
network,
right?
And so I look at all that it took to gain the attention and to gain the soul, or to tug on the soul of America, to allow its citizens who were paying taxes,
yes,
who were contributing in so many ways. I mean,
yes.
Let's not talk about our servicemen.
Right.
Let's not talk about our scientist, Charles Drew, who
right.
the Brits and the Americans through his banking mobile and such. Through the women of NASA. I mean, let's just like not talking about Garrett Morgan and all these phenomenal inventors. But when you think about it, like, just to be heard, to be given a voice. So I'm thinking now, in one of the most pivotal elections.
Yeah.
I'm going, because did you have something else to say?
Yeah, I just wanted to add, in the backdrop of all of that, especially in the Deep South, were people being lynched every day, women being hung from their feet, and
after they were raped.
They would lynch them, they would rape them, they would shoot them, and then they would slice them up and leave them hanging, so that there was a message to those who were the uppity, as they called them, to stop asking for voting rights, to stop asking for any kind of rights. And so the fact that they had to be women of faith just to keep moving forward with that in the backdrop. They were called 3/5 of a person. They weren't even considered a full person. So all of that was in the backdrop, but they did not pay attention to that because as women of faith, they knew that God was on their side and that God would take care of them and get them to the place where they needed to be. I just wanted to add that to them.
Yeah, important add, I'd have to say, which leads us directly from lynching, a form of voter suppression, a true form of voter suppression along the lines of poll taxes and, you know, jelly bean counts and literacy tests and grandfather clauses. And we look at today, and I was watching the news, and you have these voting boxes or drop-offs for these, not absentee, but these mail-in ballots, which are required now because we're in COVID-19 in some states. But in Texas, in Harris County, which is Houston, the largest, one of the largest counties, if not the largest to my recollection in each country, has one voting drop box, just one. It had 12 in the last election, but now one because the governor decided, you know what, that's how many they're gonna have. I wonder why.
Suppression, voter suppression.
So I'm asking Judy, I'm asking you, like, I've named a bunch of points of voter suppression, but you know, how is it true? How have these methods been allowed to take place? I mean, over time, you go from from threats to a point where you have politics and policy being able to skirt or loophole the law.
Well, you know, as this whole conversation shows, our country never really wanted us to vote, right? Like it wasn't built, and the republic and the democracy was not established for Black people to participate. And so we have continued on that trajectory, right? And the tools of voter suppression just have changed over time, right? So we went from the how many bubbles in a bar of soap and physical intimidation and poll taxes, et cetera, to the new tools. And so, you know, in 2000, it was the purge, right? Just getting people off the rolls. You show up to vote, all of a sudden your name's not there. How did that happen? Well, actually, Katherine Harris, who was the Secretary of State in Florida, had a plan. And her plan was that I'm gonna do a purge that is going to be so broad that it's gonna make sure that a certain group of people can't vote, right? 2004, we had long lines in Ohio, people may remember. 2008, our big issue was that that a lot of election officials had not prepared for Black turnout, right? And so we got long lines because we turned out. We actually ended up suing the state of Virginia because what we found was that all these years, I used to go to work and I'd say to my white colleagues, how long did it take you to vote? And they would say, oh, 20 minutes, 15 minutes. I was like, took me an hour and a half. I don't understand. Well, we did the mapping. Turns out that there's a disparity in the allocation of machines and poll workers, right? And then the country had the nerve to elect the first Black president. And when that happened, then all heck broke loose in terms of voter suppression, them turning to voter ID, knowing that the people who were least likely to have it were Black people.
I think that's a really important point because there are folks out there who might say, what's wrong with you having an ID and
everybody has ID. You have to get on the board. No. Well, the thing is, the deal is that the voter ID that they were requiring is much more strict than any old photo ID, right? It had to have your name, current address, photo, and signature. And so for a lot of people who've moved and don't go to DMV to get it updated, they can't use that ID. And so they made it very, very restrictive. And then let's add to that, in that year, in leading up to the 2012 election, then states started moving, especially Republican-leaning states, to cut back things like early voting and Sunday voting, because they know that we do souls to the polls on Sundays. So they're like, well, we got to get that out of here. So that was the trick then. Now let's fast forward to this year and this fight around the pandemic, which is that what the people who don't want us to vote have said, choose your health over your right to vote. Don't go vote. Because what we're going to do is, when you show up at the polls, we're gonna make sure that you are vulnerable, because we're not gonna do anything to make it easy for you or to make it safe for you. And so this has been the fight this year, has around these states that have decided that they're gonna act like business as usual. They're not gonna protect us. They're gonna move to vote by mail, but they wanna make sure that you have to postmark it like before November 3rd. But at the end of the day, what we need to understand is that, again, we started off in a country that only wanted white males who owned property to vote. And we are continuing in a country where there are people in power who want political power reserved for white men who have money and power. And so that prescription has not changed, whether it comes to people who have felony convictions, right, and making it harder for them to vote, which is laws that come right after Reconstruction to disenfranchise Black people, or if it is the tools today. So this is the thing, and for Black women in particular, you know, we carry these elections. We turn out, and when we turn out, we bring our families, we bring our husbands, we bring our children. And so, you know, we continue to be the backbone of our democracy, and that will be no different this year.
So go right ahead, Reverend.
Yeah, I wanted to just add to that Black women are a force to be reckoned with. If we remember Doug Jones in the state of Alabama, the Senate, had it not been for the Black women who turned out to elect him. And that's a stated fact. And even for all the elections that Judith has talked about, Black women have always been consistent. No matter what barrier you put up in front of us, we come out and vote because we realize the power of the vote. And it is sometimes disconcerting when you're saying to people, well, I'm not going because my vote doesn't count. We can't discourage our own self. We have enough people out there who are trying to stop us. We don't need to stop ourselves.
Yeah, and I just want to say to Ms. Dianis, can you hear me? Mm-hmm. Yeah, even today, there are a lot of things going on in terms of voter suppression. I was so surprised that just a couple of days ago, talking to a friend who lives in North Carolina, she was saying, for those who are voting by mail, they have to have a witness, and the witness has to sign it, you know. I mean, crazy things like that. I don't think we've looked at all of the ways in which this country is still trying to suppress the vote, particularly in areas where there are minority people.
Yes. The witness provisions are something that that suppresses the vote. I mean, listen, this year, voter intimidation, right, is going to be a thing, right, where we're seeing people at the polls who are acting aggressive towards voters. We may see challenges, which happens inside the polling place, right, because Trump has called and said, told people, go to the polling places, go inside the polling places. And like, he just wants to create chaos and a sense of fear in people around being participants in this democracy. And so so we're gonna see it in lots of ways, but I think, to your point earlier, for Black women, right, we will jump over those barriers. We will make sure that we participate.
That's right.
No, and Professor, go ahead, Professor.
Yeah, okay, call me Ellen and things will go easier. I think this discussion makes it clear why Black women are in the forefront. We saw that they were in the forefront in 2018 and perhaps before, and we know they will be in 2020. But this discussion makes it clear that no one knows the importance of voting more than Black people and especially Black women. And no one knows the necessity of persevering despite obstacles than Black women. And I think that's a crucial set of lessons to be learned by all voters and by all women.
That sort of echoes something I heard Gloria Steinem say. And she said, you know, she said, that just let me be clear. There would be no feminism without Black women. Mm-hmm. She said, Black women taught me everything I know about being a feminist. Mm-hmm. And I thought that was really, there's an Amazon movie about her life, and she made sure that you had, what's the name of that movie? It just doesn't come, the Four Glorias or the Glorias. Yeah. But
the one called Mrs. America?
Not that one.
No.
Not that one.
This one is called Glorias.
It's called the Glorias, yes. And so, I mean, I kind of like, it's on what you were saying, Ellen. In 2016, you had a woman on the ballot. I mean, a woman on the high ticket, Hillary Clinton, a white woman. 92% of African-American women voted for her. And like 50, it was basically 50-50.
Yeah, it was, the number is, the number that was been touted around was exit polling, which is not reliable. And it is certainly the case that Black women voted for her much more.
Overwhelmingly.
But it's also the point that all women voted for her much more than white men. And let us keep in mind.
But I say this because, you know, that's part of the discussion. Because I remember being down in Georgia and having a conversation with a woman whose Medicare was on the line, who's actually her Meals on Wheels was on the line, which was what I was there to speak to her about. And yet all of her interests seemed to fall in line with one candidate, and yet she was going to vote for another candidate because she said, when it really came down to it and I asked her the question, she said, because my husband told me to. And so I just kind of want to talk about that for a quick second. And you know, I've heard, I just want to make sure we spread the love here a little bit. Who wants to chime in on that?
I think you've hit a wonderful nerve, I'll put it that way, that a lot of people, and I'll leave it at people, have been brainwashed into believing that women should only be caretakers and comforters and all the other secondary things in life, that we don't have a brain and that we don't deserve to be at the top of the ticket. And unfortunately, that kind of brainwashing is the same kind of brainwashing that is the residual hate that we see coming across the land also. You know, people are always asking, why do they follow that person when there's just so much hatred? I said, you're talking about generational hate, that around their kitchen tables, they have been told from generation to generation, Black people are not, you know, worthy, and you'd rather be anything than, now they can't pay their bills, like you said, their Medicare is running out, they have nothing, that, you know, living in a trailer park, but they, in their mind, they are better than Black people because that's what they've been brainwashed to believe. But that's why we have to continue to say to our children that you have to still be twice as good to get into some doors, because there are people out there who just look at you and immediately make an assessment of you, and before you say anything and before you do anything. It's just a reality that we still face every day.
You know, there's still racism. There's still racism and sexism. Mm-hmm. And I'm reading Cats now. Wilkerson's book, and I'm looking at the caste system. There's still a caste system existing too. So I put all of those together: racism, sexism, and the caste system.
Yeah, and I wanted to ask you, since you are one of you said it, not me, Dr. Daley. You said you were the oldest member of this bunch. I wouldn't be able to necessarily tell that if you hadn't said it. But knowing that, you know, that you have seen a lot more than the rest of us and have been around in days when, you know, segregation, in fact, was the law of the land. When you look at the trajectory, because we talk about the pendulum shift, right? How do you see how we're doing? Are we like identifying the problem and attacking the problem the way perhaps folks did back then? Or I mean, what's going through your mind in terms of the young folk and their engagement, the folks like us in that middle range, and folks who are still out there fighting, who are like with their walkers and canes?
Well, I don't know about what you're saying to me. I'm resisting you for a reason. I'm resisting you for a reason. But it seems as though we go up and down and up and down and up and down in mountains and valleys and mountains and valleys. And I don't think that there's any straight line in terms of this. And I look at the fact that, you know, maybe in the last election, so many so-called educated people did not vote for some reason, when people have struggled just to be educated, and so that they can get people to act in a way like that, you know, and some of it is very hard to understand. So when you talk about a trajectory, I just think it goes up and down and up and down. But I look at the fact of all of the people who struggle. Coming to my mind is the person, I always think about Fannie Lou Hamer. I can never get her out of my head, Fannie Lou Hamer, who struggled so hard. I think she went 3 times to pass that test. And when she came back, she tried to teach everybody else. And then she was put off of the plantation. And I saw the 16 bullet holes around her back door. And she was damaged for life. And we look back and see people like that who fought for us to be able to cast a ballot, to even hold a job. I wonder to say, why is it that some people just resist filling out a ballot and dropping it in the ballot box, you know? And as I keep saying, yes, we have made progress and we have changed, but we still have to clear the mud minds of a lot of people.
Also, I neglected to talk to you, Judy, about, or question about the real impact of 2016 was made by social media and the bots and the attempts from foreign governments to hijack, or at least to allegedly hijack the ballot box. How do you prevent that in the future? I mean, we're what, a month? We're like weeks away, and you see it, but how do you warn folks against it?
Yeah. This is so this year there are more organizations that have gotten together to work on disinformation and trying to stop it in its tracks. But you know, social media, it festers in social media, right? Like, because people just click on things, they like things, they retweet things without even reading the things, right? And so, and let's add to it, not only do we have the bots and Russians infiltrating, but we have a candidate who is spreading misinformation, right? And so, and disinformation, with the purpose of calling into question our elections, right? Our process, and then whatever the outcomes are. So this is like a setup for what's to come, to question the legitimacy of the outcome. And so A lot of what groups like mine are doing is like calling it out. When you see it, kind of calling it out, telling people not to retweet. We're also training up young people also to do the same thing. Like you see it, you know, stop it in its tracks. Don't believe everything you read. And I think what this means also is that we are looking to create more trusted messengers, right? Like the people on this webinar, right, are trusted messengers, and people are looking for them. That's why, like, people look to Dr. Fauci. Dr. Fauci is a trusted messenger on COVID. And so we need to, and this is part, I think, of some of what we've lost because of our turn to social media, are the relationships, right, that are the people-to-people relationships. Instead of, I have an 18-year-old, and I know, you know, where she gets her news from. I asked her the other day, she said she gets it from The Shade, and my niece, The Shade Room, and my niece.
The Shade Room.
Yes, my niece gets her news from The Shade Room and TMZ. You know, so we
Tell her to turn CBS News on and be
right.
really.
But this is the thing that I want to say to folks, is that this is where we step in, and this is where Black women step in, right? It's like, what role do we play in our families and in our communities? Like, if I think about my family, you know, my immediate family, everybody's voting, they've got the right information. And then if I start to expand the circle to my cousins, right, my community, the people I grew up with, I think that that's where we have to be doing our work as Black women in continuing to bring our people along with us.
Yeah, you have the messengers, everyone from King James for some of these young folks to Kanye. I mean, it's like all over the map. And even those folks who they quote trust, you have to take with a grain of salt. Reverend Gwendolyn, and then I wanted to go to some of the questions. We have some good questions.
Yeah, I just wanted to respond to the issue of the trusted messenger, going back to women of faith and people of faith, that in the day, back as they say, back in the day, we got a lot of our messages from the church.
The church.
And so it means that we have to have that place where we trust, for issues forums, for candidate debates, for people to come and hear from the candidates instead of the Shade and all those other places you were talking about. But the trusted messenger, especially for people of faith, is the house of faith, wherever you worship. And the people who are part of your community, your family, your church family, your community of faith, for whatever denomination, and you know, it's not about denominations or religions, but wherever you call those people family outside of your birth family, those are the people you trust. And we, as was said earlier, have to make sure that we rise to the occasion and share more within our church families, the issues, the people, the things that we have to do to get people out to vote.
Can I just wanted to add, so one of the things that so friends of mine and I did this year, because we wanted to create, you know, a space for Black women, trusted messengers, is we created our own Facebook Live show. It's called The Sip. It's on Facebook Live, it's on YouTube, it's on Instagram, and it is Black women talking to Black women voters. And it's hosted by myself and 4 other friends. We started this because in the pandemic, we were lonely and isolated, and we started talking about just politics, etc. And then we're like, well, hey, we should share this conversation with the public, because this is a funny conversation, but it's also a lot of education. So we bring on guests on policy, et cetera, connecting the issues. Like tomorrow's Wednesday, on Wednesdays and Sundays tomorrow, we're gonna have a conversation about COVID, health disparities, and voting, and connecting those dots for people who may not see the connection between what's happening around them and their right to vote. And so I think that that's also important, is to be able to create those spaces for people, to bring them in. So we've had Senator Harris on, we had Senator Warren on, and you know, and we're trying to create that space for Black women.
Yeah, some of the folks are asking, I'm going to go to some of the Q&A, but I noticed this on the chat, and it's a very good point to make. How do you determine what is a legitimate news source? And oftentimes, you know, they can doctor things, but you always go back, what I use is, you go to the address, and this is a quick note, you go to the address and you make sure that the address is, you know, up on the browser is who it's supposed to be. Like if it's supposed to be from the New York Times, you make sure it's the NewYorkTimes.com. You go to the NewYorkTimes.com, you search for that particular story. But yeah, sometimes the giveaway is in the address. It's also how you find if someone is trying to tease you into stealing your identity, like from, you know, Microsoft or a business. You check the address. But now to some of the questions from all of you fabulous people out there. And one from Jacqueline Massey is that if you were checking in at the polls and a poll worker who signs you in and they happen to write anything on your ballot before they give it to you,
Get another ballot.
Machine.
They said, get another ballot. Get another ballot.
So a letter, a check mark, a star, an R, or a D, any writing of any kind, should the voter request a new ballot, I just want to finish this, to assure the ballot is not discarded as an unauthorized because of marks or writing on the form. And we all say what?
Get another ballot.
Get another ballot.
There it is. Okay. I'm having a little difficulties. Another question. Even today, from Joan Prince, there still exists tier discrimination among women. Women of color are not included equitably in the work of most movements. The question is, any thoughts about writing a powerful book authored by a collage of diverse women on what it takes for a whole new world of equity among women fighting for justice?
Tell Dr. Joan Prince that she should lead the movement for the writing the book.
Dr. Ellen, you have a professor, you have a point of.
So I would, you know, go ahead, sorry.
There's a new book out about women. I've got a limited wheelhouse, but there's a new book out about women in the suffrage movement called Vanguard by Martha Jones. And that's a good book to look at. That's not the full length of the history, but I recommend that for people who are interested in this particular movement, Vanguard.
So I want to take issue with this comment actually, because I also think that I think that while women have not maybe been visible, right, as much as men because of ego. Right? I mean, Ella Baker was at the table. She was creating a vision. She was clear. She was the strategist for one of the key strategists for SNCC. Diane Nash was a key strategist. And so it is not about vision, et cetera. And I'm 50 something. And so
you're a baby compared to
so in my realm of generational women in movement, I will say that I may not be as visible, and that's because men do take up a lot of space. They take up a lot of space.
How much space?
A lot of space. And so that doesn't mean that I'm not visioning. You may not know my name, but believe me, they know my name and they know who to call when they need something done because I'm gonna get the job done. Now, if I look at the younger generation in the racial justice movement, especially those in the movement for Black Lives and Black Lives Matter movement, whichever you wanna call it, a lot of women are leading. They are on the front lines. They are the strategists. Many of them are queer women. And I will tell you, it has been a total change and shift in terms of women being out front. So I just want to clear that up because
yeah, well, no, Tarana Burke, Tamika Mallory, I mean.
Right.
Another book recommendation from a long time ago goes up to the 1960s. Paula Giddings, When and Where I Enter, which is a truly great book. When and Where I Enter. That's a quote from Anna Julia Cooper, who says, when and where I enter, from the 1890s, when and where I enter, There the race enters with me. And it is a truly great book and still is.
So, and another question is, do we think Kamala Harris is going to motivate more people to the polls?
I do. Think her energy is contagious. And that's what you need when you're, I have to be careful with my words now. That's what you need when you're fighting against other kind of people. I'll put it that way. But I do believe that her energy is contagious. Her intellect is strong and sound. And, you know, she gives what you want to see in someone you call a leader. She understands why she's in the room. She understands her seat at the table, just like Shirley Chisholm said, if they won't give you a seat at the table, bring your folding chair. But she understands why she's there. She articulates well why she should be who she is and what she should be doing. And I think, you know, for people who are actually paying attention, they can get what they need from her when they listen to her message. So I would say yes.
And Gwen, she is sane. That's very key. She's a very sane.
I was trying not to go there.
She is not suffering. She's not suffering from empathy deficient ego.
And she's also a member of that other sorority from Howard University we were talking about.
But we're all together. We're
all wearing the same color because we are all pushing.
She was at Howard. She pledged my freshman year.
She's all
pledged I remember her walking around like this.
We're all together, Michelle.
But this one, we are all together. It's a D9.
I did not pledge at Howard. I was not chosen. I was not.
We're all together.
No, I'm honorary, honey. I'm honorary. But there's another question. This one from Shirley Perry. It says that, how do you get disillusioned young Black adults to vote? I get the feeling that they do not understand the urgency of the 2020 vote. Mentioning the pain and suffering of our ancestors is like talking Greek to them. I just don't understand it.
Yeah, that does not work. So we actually did some polling, if you believe in polling. We did polling of 18 to 24-year-olds, Black and Latinx, and Asian. And what we found is that young people, this election season, there are 3 things that motivate them and that they are concerned about. Top of mind is COVID, because of many of them have lost family members, and they themselves are concerned about their health. The second is racial discrimination, and the third is police brutality. And so those second two being connected. For them, they're also feeling very much in despair, like the rest of our community, right? And feeling like, they've been through a lot. There's, I have an 18-year-old, she's sitting the first year of college, she's on Zoom classes, sitting in a dorm room, not meeting anybody, not having any fun. And many of them are still home. She didn't have a prom, she didn't have a graduation. So they're in despair. And so while they're in despair, many of them also took to the streets after George Floyd was killed and Breonna Taylor was killed and other people killed by the police. And so what is important in moving them to the polls is connecting the power that they had when they showed up in the streets to the power that they have in the polls, and connecting those issues. If you care about policing and changing policing, here's how we're gonna do it. We have to vote in a new mayor. We have to vote in, for example, in Georgia, there's 154 counties or 159 counties, 159 sheriff's races this year. All of them are up. So if you care about policing, let's vote for the sheriff that reflects our values. So it's just really important. But the history piece, they're like, yeah, okay, whatever, that's so yesterday. But power to them is very important.
A related point is that in my political group, we found it's mostly women of my age, and we found like women, reproductive rights and choice are not that important to them anymore. It's not their immediate issue for similar reasons to what Judith said. I don't know if they take it for granted or whatever, but that's not what motivates them. Things like climate change, police brutality, that motivates them.
Yeah, so
we have wisdom and we have experience, but we can't substitute our perspective from that of the people who are the future.
you know, it's interesting, in 2018 in Harris County, Houston, Texas, you had this voting campaign that lit like a fire called Black Girl Magic. Do you remember that? It was a picture of all of these women who were up for judgeships in Harris County. And I think they were like all of them won, or close to all of them won.
I think so.
And it was such a powerful, like, because they kind of rallied together as sort of a block in their campaign effort, and it went viral. But it's like young folks seem to need like excitement and energy. They're, you know, the Yes We Can with Barack Obama, the, you know, and other, I remember the Clinton campaign back in '92. That was like magic. It was, I was a young person and I totally remember people were so excited, Rock the Vote, MTV. It was like, and you don't really see, I don't know if it's because of the sort of stretch out, the sort of the influence of multi-channels and social media, but you know, there's like young folks need some excitement. Yeah. I wanted to,
my first election was Jesse Jackson.
Yes, Jesse Jackson.
I remember being so excited, and then the next time he ran, I wrote on my jeans, "Run, Jesse, run," on my jeans. And so I think the young people are they're gonna be motivated. I mean, there are pictures circulating on social media of all the sorority sisters at, I don't know what school it was, going to the polls together. There today was Texas Southern had a march to the polls with their bands and their cheerleaders. So I think we're gonna see people turning out in probably record numbers.
Well, I think sessions like this are helping people, I think. But I want to throw a question to the professor. Is there something missing in our educational system today? Because I can remember that really all of us came through school thinking that we had certain things we have to do. Maybe we got it in civics or something else, but I don't know what's missing. I'm throwing it to Professor Ellen.
Well, look, I've retired now, but I taught at a public university, only public universities, and that makes a difference. Lots and lots of my students were immigrants, and they cared a lot about education. And I also taught a lot of women's studies classes, and those were great because these young girls, it was not true that feminism didn't have meaning to them. They came alive in these classes. So I don't know. I'd have to go back and teach regular, you know, U.S. history to see the yawning of the students, and they're falling asleep at their computers. But I do think young immigrants and second generation immigrants are alert to these issues more than, you know, multi-generation Americans. Thelma.
So I wanted to ask this.
People are saying put civics back in. I don't know about that, but many people are saying put civics back into the curriculum.
Yeah, yeah. So just two things. One here is Susan Vanderbilt is asking, is there a concerted effort to educate about naked ballots and the need for a second envelope when submitting mail ballots? If someone could quickly answer that. And then I want to ask the important electoral college question.
Sure. Naked ballots. I mean, there's a lot of, well, first of all, for those who don't know what a naked ballot is, it is that in certain states, it's very common in Pennsylvania, but in other states also, when you vote your mail-in ballot, you have to put it in a secrecy envelope, and then you put it in the envelope that gets mailed in or dropped off. And so there are efforts, public education efforts underway. I know the Secretary of State in Pennsylvania, but there are also some very cute, funny videos that are circulating about naked videos that are done by celebrities. There's one done by Sarah Silverman that is very, very funny because it's a bunch of naked celebrities talking about don't have a naked ballot. So there are efforts underway to educate people.
So this is a really significant question because it goes to the root of what many of you were talking about, and you specifically, Judy. This nation was not set up for us to vote. Women, no. Women of color, no. Anybody of color, no. And that 3/5 when we were slaves or enslaved people, is part of the reason the Electoral College was devised. And so like one is the Electoral College a dinosaur? Because it allows like, I don't know what, 35% of this, it's like 35% of the population gets kind of 60% of the say. Mm-hmm. I don't know the breakdown, but it's like, it's pretty, go ahead, Professor.
Well, I guess I want to say two things about this. This might not be the most popular answer. You know, it's a good thing that we've only had how many amendments? 25, 26?
26.
We do not want an easily amended constitution. If we had an easily amended constitution, a lot of bad stuff would go down. So we really want there to be very high barriers. You know, the right wing is trying very hard to have constitutional conventions because they want all kind of stuff introduced.
Well,
into
that's what happened at the turn of the century, right? The established Jim Crow and Plessy.
No, not constitutional amendments. I mean,
no, I know the conventions at the state level, but you're saying
at the state level, definitely
having the same thing happening at the federal level.
But right, exactly. That's, you know, this structure we have called federalism, where you move back and forth from the states to the national government. It's used against us, but it's also used for us. We can turn one direction when we lose one direction and the other direction. The other thing I want to say, and I hope Judith can give me the further details, what is the plan that's being developed at the state level so that more and more states are agreeing that their electoral votes will go to the person who wins the popular vote? You know what it's called? And several states have passed these, I don't know if they're amendments or laws, but the point is that your state would agree that it can control its electors. So I'm not sure if it would need to be a state amendment or state law.
Instead of winner take all? I mean, winner of...
Not even winner take all. But if the majority of people in the United States vote for candidate X, your state's electors would go for candidate X. So that would end up being, and if there's a certain percentage of the states or number of the electors that do that, it would be the equivalent of the Electoral College voting, the Electoral College disappearing or voting for the popular vote. That's the best we can do as far as I can see.
Yeah, I don't think, I mean, I think it is a dinosaur. I don't think that it will change anytime soon. I think there are these questions about the electors, right? Like the electors that decide that they're going to go in a totally different way than they were supposed to go, right? Which is a question that went up to the Supreme Court. But, you know, this is the, you know, the way in which the systemic structural racism stays for forever, right? Is that it's so embedded in our country and who we are that it will take a long time. I mean, I know there have been efforts, there are efforts to, there's a bill, HR 1 in Congress that passed on the House side that would be an omnibus voting bill. There's a right to vote constitutional amendment that's been introduced that we're actually supportive of, that also would allow people with felony convictions to vote. But you know, these are things that like we would have to have the public will. And like I said, like in this moment where we have changing demographics in this country, with the black, you know, browning of America means that those who are in power, it's not in their best interest to change the process and the rules, because if they do that, they will lose.
We didn't even talk about Shelby. I mean, and the impact of Shelby, and that's my bad. But if you look at the changing demographics, and
right.
I mean, what comes to mind is if you have fewer people allowed to participate in the process, that sounds an awful lot like that nation that Nelson Mandela helped to turn around before he was let out of jail.
You know, it's very demoralizing too, because the average citizen does not understand the Electoral College. And some of them may, you know, that they vote and is my vote counting. They don't understand if you have the popular vote here and the Electoral College is something else.
Right.
If you ask people to explain it, they cannot explain it.
That's right.
You know,
That's part of the disenfranchisement, because when I can't understand what I've just done, I thought I voted for candidate A and candidate A got the majority of the votes, but candidate B won because of this thing called Electoral College. And back to the question of civics and government has to come back into the classroom so that we can understand, we the people can understand all of these things that are hovering around us. But when we wait for somebody else to explain it to us, who really doesn't understand it either, because they're just trying to win the election, then that's when we are disenfranchised even more. So I think part of it is education, the education system. Civics has got to come back, government's got to come back, but we've also got to be intentional in our own communities. We can't wait for what other people are not going to do for our young people, but we've got to explain to them so that they will know and they will be educated. It's just like our HBCUs. When they want us to go to college, we created our own HBCUs so we could go to college. So it means that we've got to be intentional, and women do that, of making sure we understand and our children understand so that they can be educated on the issues and make those quality decisions for their lifetime.
So suppression has been proven. I mean, we see it.
Mm-hmm.
So when they overturned Shelby, then you know it was under the guise of, oh, these states no longer suppress. So my question is, how do you? I mean, what has to happen for the protections to be put back in place? Is it simply?
Well, it's like
the legislation.
Yes, it's like Roe v. Wade. When we lose the Supreme Court, which we will, then it means that legislation has to be passed. And I think voting rights legislation can be rewritten so that it avoids the dangers of the law that Shelby was able to throw out. So I do think, let us remember that the Supreme Court is only a last step. The legislature is the more important step, and we have a shot at the legislature, which we will not for a long time of the courts.
Yeah, so there is a bill that passed the House that Mitch McConnell will not move because he's busy packing the courts, which is the John Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act, which would change which would give us coverage of states that engage in voter suppression again. And for those who don't know, because of the Supreme Court's decision in Shelby, what it has meant is a state like Texas, where the governor decided that there's only going to be one drop box. What would have happened before the Shelby case is that decision that he made would have either gone to the Department of Justice for it to be approved, or it would have gone to court to have it approved. And so because we don't have that, we don't have checks and balances on these states who've decided that we should not be able to vote. And so the Voting Rights Advancement Act would fix that.
You know, we talk about civics, and one of the things I think that people don't understand, even more than the Electoral College, is that the federal government really has, the Constitution does not give the federal government control over voting. Only the 15th and the 19th Amendment give these limited little things,
Yeah.
but the right to vote remains where it was in the original Constitution, which is under the control of the states. And I have to tell you that the suffragists in the 1870s tried to get a different kind of amendment passed that said the right to vote was the right of all national citizens.
Right.
I don't think the majority of people have any idea that that is not the case. National citizens do not have the right to vote. The right to vote is controlled by the states, who can do whatever they want without any federal oversight.
And what's important is that that was a compromise that was made in order to keep the states together, right, in the midst of slavery, right? So this was like, we have to do this because we can't let the Southerners wanted to have their power. And so this is why I say it's embedded. We keep perpetuating the same system.
And I know Michelle is chomping at the bit right now. I'll just say, I wanted to talk about the ERA amendment because it's still floating around out there.
Talk about HBCU to get the president to stop saying what he's saying about HBCUs.
He needs to stop saying a lot of things.
There's so much to talk about.
Exactly.
Michelle, you need another one of these great panels.
We do. What do you?
It was the best panel I've been on all Centennial season.
2.0.
Tell you what, let's make this happen in person when we can come back and be in the cathedral together and invite all of the hundreds of guests who are with us to come share the space. You know, it's almost 8:30. I don't think there's much more that I can say besides thank you for such an extraordinary conversation. You covered such a huge range of issues. You're all brilliant and wonderful, and I really hope that you, we talked about all of the hard work that women do, and I hope that you all have lots of people who support you in your lives. And I hope that you are in networks of relationships where you're supporting others, because we don't do this alone, right? Like that's one of the not so secret secrets of the way that women do our work, is that we don't do it by ourselves, right? We rely on each other, and the energy and the collaboration that was even part of this conversation was such a demonstration of that. So I'm so grateful to each of you, and I am going to invite Reverend Boyd in just a minute. I'm going to give you a little heads up to come close us out in prayer. The final thing that I want to say is that we are in hard times financially all over the country, and I hope that those of you who are watching are able to support your own local communities. I hope that if you have resources to spare, that you are making those available to nonprofits, to your faith communities. Should you feel the call to help the cathedrals in our work and our programming, we would welcome your generosity, and also know that most of our dollars get spent close to home. So if the cathedral feels close to home for you, we would love your support, and we know that you all are helping encourage everybody to be involved in this world in really lovely and helpful ways that often have nothing to do with how much money is in our pockets. So Reverend Boyd, would you close us out, please?
Thank you.
Dr. Daley, I see, you're on mute, Dr. Daley. Well, we can't. Dr. Daley, do you have one more thing to say? Oh.
Coordinating this. Thank you for coordinating this.
Oh, you're so welcome. Our privilege and honor, absolutely.
Okay. For those who pray, God, we thank you for the time that has been spent together. And we thank you for the freedom of speech, the freedom to have an array of ideas and opinions shared to move our nation forward. God, we thank you for each panelist and everyone who was on the webinar, God, that they will leave this session, this conversation, renewed, refreshed, and ready to go out and make a difference in the world. We thank you for your word, where you remind us and to do justly, to love mercy, and to walk humbly with you. So let us, God, use that as our mantra as we leave this place, but never leave your presence. Let your grace and your mercy cover us and keep us until we meet again. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Amen. All right. I was just reminded that we didn't tell you how to support the Cathedral, so there will be a link in the chat and a slide on your screen. And this has been recorded, so it'll be available on YouTube. You're welcome to share it with other folks. And panelists, if you want to hang out for a few minutes while all of our guests leave after we put that slide on, we'd love just to say a little mini thank you the way that we would after the whole thing was over if we were together in person. So if you have a few minutes to hang out, we hope you will. And to everyone else, have a great night. Thanks so much for joining us.